So a few months ago, I made a video saying that the Nintendo Switch 2 device is not a true handheld gaming device. Throughout that video, I explained what my definition of a true handheld gaming device is, and I guess the modern term that everybody uses now is pocketable. I think I just always use the words portable and handheld interchangeably, and they meant pocketable. But whatever word you would like to use for this, it's basically, in my mind, any device that you can take with you anywhere you want to go, and it'll last almost an entire day's worth of charge, sometimes multiple days. Realistically speaking, you'll be able to fit it into your pocket, and just in general, you'll be able to carry it around without too much of a thought. Obviously, since the Switch 1 was made, these types of devices slowly began to wither away. Primarily because Nintendo was really the only one making these devices with those types of characteristics in mind. Now, in general, I used to consider the Nintendo Switch 1 to be barely portable. And I'm talking like the OG Switch, not the Lite and not the OLED model. I used to say it was like an 80-20 hybrid device, meaning it feels like it's 80% a home console and 20% a portable console. That was the case with the Switch 1. It was too big to fit into your pocket. The battery life was not all that good if you're playing a pretty intense game, but if you're playing something light, you can get a decent amount of time out of it. And for the most part, you can play it for a long period of time without feeling too many cramps. Not that you won't feel any cramps at all. After all, this is a very flat device. It doesn't have any grips, unless you buy a special grip for it, obviously. And the Joy-Cons and sticks are really small, so some people have issues holding the Switch in handheld. I don't really have any issues. I got fat fingers too, so I'm not sure why it doesn't bug me as much, but I noticed many others have issues with it. Now, during my 1 hour hands-on with the Switch 2 on launch night, I did notice that it was heavy. Not like, heavy enough to be a burden that's gonna ruin your day, but it's heavy enough to be noticeable. And that could just be a situation where you would need to adjust from using the Switch 1 to the Switch 2 so your muscles in your wrist will get used to it, but it's definitely a thing. Now, I didn't want to discuss it when I was talking about my first impressions with the console because I felt like that would be a nitpick. But now it seems like more and more people are mentioning it. And the thing is, it's still in the same form factor. It's still a flat console. So you still get that awkward cramping that you would get when holding the Switch, but now it's on a heavier device, so it happens a little bit faster and it hurts a little bit more, I guess, based off of what I'm hearing. And it just takes the Switch 1, which was already a barely portable device, and makes it even less portable with the Switch 2. Partially because it's bigger, partially because it's heavier, and all around just feels a little bit less comfortable to hold for a longer period of time. Not necessarily for everybody, but I imagine a lot of people are feeling this way. I've heard a lot of people feel this way, and many people have shared their opinions of that online. Another thing that I remember thinking would be a nitpick, but I've seen some other people complain about it, is when you're actually holding the device in your hand, does anybody else have like their pinky rub up against the grips that are on the bottom that are next to the kickstand? Or I guess they're technically on the kickstand. I found that to be a little bit annoying, but it was more like a minor nuisance. Didn't really matter that much. Now, outside of that, the most obvious reason this feels like it's much less of a portable device is because of the battery life. There are a lot of people complaining about the battery life. I do remember a lot of people complaining about the battery life of the Switch 1 when that first came out too, because most people would be playing Breath of the Wild, and Breath of the Wild was pretty good at draining the battery. And I'm seeing a whole lot of complaints here when it comes to running Mario Kart World, and obviously other intense games like Cyberpunk, saying that it was almost exactly 2 hours. Now, I'm guessing if somebody was to open up the NSO and play one of the older consoles on there, maybe even run an indie game like Deltarune, they can probably push it up to that maximum, 5 or 6 hour window that they had advertised. I think it was 6.5 on the higher end. But if you're looking to play a Switch 2 game on your Switch, it's gonna last a lot shorter than that. I do wonder, once all the techies put their thinking caps on, if they figure out like an optimal graphical fidelity versus battery life balance, where if you were to lower the resolution or brightness or turn off some special features to make it last a little bit longer. Because I imagine somebody will come out eventually and be like, if you want it to last a lot longer, then change this to that. But for now, with just the out-of-the-box settings that people are usually playing on, there's definitely a noticeable drain. And this is not out of the ordinary. Again, I remember back when Breath of the Wild came out, it was like 3.5 hours or 4 hours people would get out of it. I believe if you maxed out everything, it would be around 2.5 hours. But throughout the Switch's life, they made modifications, they released newer versions. They found ways to increase the duration of the Switch's battery life. Now, I'm not really an expert on how batteries drain exactly once it's at full and then it works its way downwards. I don't know if it's a steady decrease because I swear to God, sometimes these batteries just drop a lot quicker from 10 to 20% or from 80 to 100%. But I've also never really put this stuff to the test. Someone I know did, however. He was curious to see just how fast the Switch 2 would drain compared to his Switch 1, because he noticed that just when jumping around the home screen, he felt the battery was draining really quickly. And I remember thinking that as well. That's part of the reason he decided to do this test, because on launch night, when he bought the Switch 2, it felt like not too long after we had turned everything on, one of us made a comment about how low the percentage was. So again, none of us are experts on this. None of us are really the people you want to use as sources of how fast the battery drains on a console. But just for fun, he turned on his Switch 2, put it on max settings, put the Switch 1 next to it, left both devices on the home screen, and timed to see how long it would take it to drop to 10%. It took a little bit over half an hour for the Switch 2 to make it to 90%, and at that point the Switch 1 was at 94%. This was a Switch 1 from 2020, so it had the improved battery. So again, not an expert, totally just messing around with these numbers. He doesn't know what he's doing, I don't know what I'm doing, but it seems like there's a pretty big drop off between the Switch 1 and the Switch 2 when it comes to battery life. So I completely understand why it's getting a lot of hate for this. Hate by fans, hate by regulars, hate by not doomers and haters and the like. And it makes full sense to me that this would be an issue for many. Because while there are tons of people out there who are like, I don't care, I have it in my dock and I'm fine. Or like, I don't care, I always got a charger nearby. Or I don't care, I got a portable charger anytime I need it. At the end of the day, it's still a hybrid console. It's meant to be handheld. At least to an extent, it should be portable. It should have a decent enough battery life. But if the Switch 1 was like an 80-20 console, this is seeming like it's like a 90% a home console and 10% a handheld. And that's kind of problematic because something like VRR only works in handheld mode, not in TV mode. And I imagine, depending on the game you're playing, that variable refresh rate could cause an even faster battery drain. Which just all around kind of makes it feel like this whole hybrid thing, the whole premise of the Switch itself, loses a lot of its appeal with the Switch 2. And of course it does, because the Switch 2 is a more powerful version of the Switch 1. But the problem is when you go with more power, and you go with a larger size, and you go with a shorter battery life, you sacrifice that portability, you sacrifice the handheld nature of the console itself. And then at that point, you start to wonder, why even make a Switch? Like at that point, you might as well just focus on a home console. If the previous version of your console was already barely a handheld device as it is, barely portable, not pocketable, whatever phrase you'd like to use, I kind of wonder why they decide to focus so much on power while still keeping that handheld form factor. Because they had to have known what they were sacrificing when they decided to make a larger Switch. And I guess in fairness, there are a lot of people that will play these things handheld at home. They'll always have a plug nearby. They don't really need to take it out anywhere. And the value for them could be the fact that they don't gotta plug it in on their TV, or they can lay on the couch while somebody else is watching something, or they can play in bed, in the bathroom, etc. Like, even me when I used the Switch 1, I wasn't taking it out with me much. But the Switch 1 was already on the lower end of how portable and how pocketable and how handheld it was. And I mean, maybe in Nintendo's mind, they're like, oh, we're gonna outdo the Steam Deck when it comes to battery life and how heavy this thing is. So maybe they just figured, what's the alternative? This is better in their minds. But it really kind of drives home what I was trying to argue a few months ago. You can hold this device in your hands. You can play with it in your hands. By definition, yeah, it's a device you can play in your hands. It's a handheld device. You can pick it up, grab it with you, take it anywhere you go. By definition, it's portable. Just like a laptop that's pretty big is portable as well. Just like a tablet is portable. And it works on a battery, so you can play it without plugging it into anything. It's got its own screen, so technically, it is a portable device, and it is a handheld device. I understand that. But it's a handheld device that does a worse job at being handheld compared to its predecessor. And I know what many are going to say. Well, yeah, when you went from the DS Lite to the 3DS, didn't you notice the battery was much worse? When I went from the DS to the 3DS, I went from being able to play either glorified Game Boy Advance titles or barely Nintendo 64 level 3D games to proper 3D handheld titles. And literally 3D, like with the glasses-free 3D stuff. Like, it was a drastic generational leap from the DS to the 3DS when it comes to the graphics that were on the handheld. And likewise, when you jumped from the 3DS to the Switch, it was a generational leap. It was evolutionary. From the Switch to the Switch 2, you're getting the 1080p quality you were getting on the Switch 1 games, but now you're getting them in handheld. The docked quality on your handheld. The benefits made in these leaps outweigh what was sacrificed to get there. And throughout these leaps, it was still, for the most part, reasonable. It was understandable. Like going from the Game Boy Color to the Game Boy Advanced, for example. I get it. But in this case, it feels like it's just really skirting that line. It's skirting it to the point where it almost feels like, yeah, should have just made a home console at this point. By now, I guess then you can't really move it around as seamlessly and you can't play handheld around your house. There's a lot you're sacrificing there. But it almost feels like it would have all around just been a better decision to make more people happy, because now the people that are playing handheld are going to be a little bit more disappointed anyway. It's tough. Don't get me wrong. I'm not sitting here thinking that Nintendo made the wrong decision by doing the exact same console again. That's not what I'm arguing right now, at least. And I realize from a business standpoint, you don't want to give up that handheld stuff completely and just go straight to the console, because there are a lot of people that you will upset if you do that. And then at the same time, if you make the Switch cap off at a certain resolution or you make it not get to a certain refresh rate, you're also going to anger a lot of people that wanted the more powerful stuff. So regardless, at the end of the day, it's not a very easy decision to make for Nintendo, to their credit, and I understand that fully. I just almost wonder if there was a way they could have released two consoles side by side together where you can buy either the handheld one or the home one, which is what they used to do, obviously, but back then they weren't really trying to make the most powerful home console they can. They weren't trying to compete with the big boys. They were okay lagging a lot more than they're currently lagging. And they are lagging right now, obviously, because they have to be partially a handheld device and also to cut certain costs or whatever their excuses are. Either way, it's just an observation I've had. I had a whole discussion on what handheld games were like back before we decided to merge the home and handheld console market. And many people were correct in saying that the handheld games are now kind of being taken up by a lot of the indie games. But like when there was those classic games that were either on your 3DS or your DS or your Game Boy Advance, and you could just take them with you wherever you want and play for little short spurts and then put it away and the battery lasts. And, a lot of that is not really around as much anymore. They are with like portable third-party devices that are available now, and there's plenty of them out there. There's an amazing market. I haven't tried many of them, so I can't really recommend a specific one, but I've used a few, and usually they're a pretty good experience. But still, again, Nintendo fan, for me, there's nearly nothing like that true Nintendo classic handheld experience. And I wasn't expecting the Switch 2 to bring that back, but seeing all these complaints about battery life, all these complaints about how big it is when you're playing on your own, and just how uncomfortable it might feel to hold for long periods of time, just goes to show how much further away from it we're moving. And then it kind of sucks because when they do bring in a light console, that light console now does not connect to the TV. So there would be a weird alternate reality where the Switch Lite is smaller, more portable, and actually connects to the TV. And you just gotta buy the dock separately if you want to do it. And that could theoretically give you the best of both worlds. Obviously, you'd miss out on having Joy-Cons, but for some people that might be worth it. I think there is a scenario where both parties could be happy with a single console. And who knows, maybe that's where Nintendo goes with the Lite this time. Maybe they find a way to balance it so that you can connect to the TV. I highly doubt it, but it would be nice to just ponder upon for a second. Whatever the case, there will be more and more reviews about this console, and I imagine you'll be hearing a lot of the same stuff throughout about the battery life and the size and what you're sacrificing and what you're getting out of it. And at the end of the day, it's all a matter of preference, and I think regardless of this hypothetical discussion, we will not be seeing an alternate lineup of handheld consoles and their games anytime soon, if ever again, from Nintendo. So it's just a fun discussion on a non-existent circumstance. Either way, that's all I really got for tonight. Thank you all for listening, and I will catch you on the next one. Oh, also, I didn't try this, but apparently playing Switch 1 games on the Switch 2 handheld kind of sucks because it stretches it out. So yeah, it is an objectively worse device at the moment because the entire Switch 2 library is Switch 1 games, and they now look worse handheld. There you go.